to the CPR.
Good afternoon. This is Courtney Neubauer with the Division of Nutrition Support. I thank all of you for joining us today. I know this training was added with fairly short notice, so it was added last Thursday, but I appreciate you making time in your schedule to come and listen. We felt like it was very important for us to go over where we are with the school meals emergency cost reimbursement program, just so that most of you can kind of know what to expect and the timelines. This presentation is fairly brief, so the goal here is to really give you the information that you need to know, and then allow you to go back to the many other hats that you wear for the rest of the day. So we are going to keep this fairly brief, but the goal is to go over the reimbursement program, where we are, what to expect as we move forward into this program. So just quickly, the COVID-19 emergency operating costs was part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and the purpose is to provide additional funding for child nutrition program operators whose revenue decreased or were interrupted during the early days of the public health emergency. So the time period we're looking at is when this emergency started. So when schools closed, which we all probably remember that Friday the 13th pretty well, but we're looking at the time period from when schools closed to the end of the school year. So this relief is intended to address funding shortfalls. It is not intended to address increased costs due to COVID-19, and the payment formula is tied to past reimbursements. So we're not asking for you to submit any data. We're able to use the data that was submitted on claims to determine payment amounts. So the payment formula to determine what the payment amount per month, it is looking at 55% of the difference between the reimbursements from the months of April, May, and June of 2020, and comparing that reimbursements to the same months in 2019. And for March, the calculation is slightly different. So March 2020, it is also 55% of the difference, but we will divide that total in half. So we're looking at March 2020 and March 19, we're multiplying that by 55%, but we're taking that total and dividing that in half to determine the payment amount. And the calculations are made on a per month basis. So if we calculate March and it's a negative number, which would indicate no payment, we would not take that negative amount and add that to April, May, and June to come up with an aggregate sum. We would count March as a 0, and then we would add your payment amount for April, May, and June. So each month is able to stand independently from the other months to determine the funding amount. Reimbursements are based on all meals and snacks served by schools under any of the programs that they may operate. So we're going to look at National School Lunch, School Breakfast. We're also going to look at SSO or Seamless Summer Option, and we're going to look at Summer Food Service Program. We also, there's a separate reimbursement program, but all the calculations are the same for CACFP. So if you are a school system that also operates CACFP at-risk meals, or maybe even traditional CACFP, and you have Head Start centers that you operate, that calculation will be done as well on CACFP reimbursements, but the payment for CACFP will be issued different from the school payment. So when we're looking at calculations for traditional schools, we're looking at National School Lunch, School Breakfast, Seamless Summer. So I know many school systems moved to Seamless Summer in March, and then also the Summer Food Service Program. So some have, they transitioned on to summer in March and April of last year. This does not include other school program reimbursements. So this will not include fresh fruit and vegetable or equipment grants or any other pots of money. It's just going to look at the reimbursements. The value of USDA foods is not included in the payment calculation. And this is also very important when you're thinking about CACFP. So CACFP, the value of the cash in lieu of commodities is not calculated into the equation. Non-school sponsors that operate just SFSP or Summer Food Service Program are not eligible to receive payments. So the Summer Food Service Program calculations are included with the National School Lunch. So only our school systems that operate National School Lunch and then transitioned onto summer are included in that calculation. So traditional Summer Food Service Program sponsors are not included. And also the state, up to 1% of the reimbursement amount is made available to the state to cover administrative costs for operating the reimbursement program. So some terms to remember when we're thinking about the emergency cost program. The reimbursement period, so the period that we're looking to reimburse for, is March, April, May, and or June of 2020. The reference period, so the period that we're looking back at to compare those reimbursements, are March, April, May, and or June of 2019. I'm not sure where my 9 went, but it disappeared. The alternate period, so the alternative period that we can use is January and February 2020. And so this is a period that we would use for new SFAs that may not have been in operation in March, April, May, or June of 2019. So our new program operators are SFAs that were not yet operating during the reference period, so March through June of 2019 for any given month. And all other program operators are our SFAs that were operating in the reference period and then also in the reimbursement period. So when we look at this calculation, all other program operators, which is the majority of our school systems, we will calculate the differences between 2019 and 2020 meal reimbursements for each month. So we'll do that for March, April, May, and June. If the difference between 2019 and 2020 is greater than 0, then we'll multiply that difference by 55%. For March, we're going to divide that total by 2, and this will determine the payment amount. So in this example, we have March of 2019, $10,000. March of 2020 was $7,000. The difference there is $3,000. So this school system was reimbursed roughly $3,000 less in 2020 than they were in 2019. We'll then multiply that total by 55% or 0.55, which gives us $1,650. And since this is for March, we're going to divide that by 2, which gives us a payment amount of $825 for March. For April, May, and June, the calculation is the same, except for we will not divide that total by 2. So April will be the reimbursement amount for 2019 minus the 2020 amount. So here, 11,000 minus 0. So this particular school system did not operate at all in 2020 in April. And so the difference is $11,000. We'll multiply that by 0.55, which gives us $6,050. We'll then do that same calculation for May and June. And the payment amount that we would issue for this particular SFA would be the sum of those 4 numbers. So 825, 6,050, 4,950, and 3,300. So the one payment amount that would be issued for this SFA would be the total, that those 4 numbers added together. Now, if this is not a new SFA, so this is a sponsor that operated in March and April of 2019, or March, April, and May of 2019, but maybe it's a sponsor that doesn't typically operate summer. So in June of 2019, there were no meals claimed, so the value would be 0. That sponsor is not considered a new SFA. We would do this calculation. So we would do 0 minus whatever the 2020 amount would be, which would give us a negative number. And that particular month, the payment amount would be 0. So any negative numbers when we do this initial calculation would become a payment amount of 0 for that particular month. New program operators, what we will do here is we'll calculate the average of January 2020 and February 2020, which this is the alternative period. We'll then calculate the difference between the alternative period average and the reimbursement month. And we'll do that for March, April, May, and June. If the difference between the alternative period and the 2020 reimbursement month is greater than 0, we'll then multiply that by the 55%. And for March, we'll divide that number by 2. And this is the payment amount for that particular month. So in this example here, this is a new SFA. So they were not operating in March through June of 2019. So here we would use the average of January 2020 and February 2020. So the January claim was 11,500. The February claim was 9,500. Which gives us an average of 10,500. We would use that average to begin the calculation for each of the 4 months. So March, April, May, and June. We then would subtract the 2020 reimbursement for that corresponding month, which would give us a difference. And then we would multiply the difference by 55%. For March, we'll divide that by 2. So for this particular example, we use that average for March of 10,500. We subtract the 2020 reimbursement for March, which was 7,000, gives us the difference of 3,500. Multiply that by 0.55, which would give us 1,750. We'll divide that by 2, which gives us $962.50. For April, we'll do that same calculation, except we will not divide by 2. So here, the April calculation, the average of the January and February claim would be used as your reference period. We then would subtract the 2020 reimbursement. So in this example, it's 0. It gives us the difference of 10,500. We would then multiply that 10,500 by 0.55, which would give us the payment amount of $5,775. We would then add all 4 of those months. So once we did that calculation for April, May, and June, we would add $962.50 plus the $5,775 plus the $500,225 and the $4,125. And the sum of those 4 numbers would be the payment amount issued to that particular SFA. So what else do we need to know about this calculation? If the calculation for a given month equals 0 or is a negative, no payment is provided. So if you are a school system and you were better off on in 2020. So you made more money in 2020 than you did compared to 2019. You would not be eligible for reimbursement for that particular month. Also, partially new operators, so any schools that operate in May and June of 2019, but maybe were not operating in March and April, we would use the new formula for March and April, and then we would use the all other formula for May and June. And like I mentioned earlier, we cannot do the opposite. So if the program is not new and they were operating in March and April of 2019, and maybe not operating in May and June, we would not be able to use that average of January and February to determine the payment amounts for those latter months. If it's not a new sponsor and there's any claim months of 2019 that are zero, we would still use that all other calculation. Additionally, continued participation is required. So to determine eligibility, first, we have to check for valid claims that were submitted for any of the months of September through December of 2020. So we are looking to determine if a school system is currently operating. So did you start off school year 2020, 2021 with any valid claims? And that would be valid claims in any of the programs that were operating. So if you started the year on summer, that is still a valid claim that we would look at for determining eligibility. If you don't fall into that first category, then the second group, we would then ask for an assurance. So if you are a school system and you have not began operating again this school year, but you intend to start serving next school year when this pandemic is hopefully over, then we would then seek assurances that you will file claims within the first full semester after the end of this pandemic. There are very, very few school systems that would fit into that second category. The majority of our sponsors have submitted claims for any of the months of September through December. And if you're one of the school systems that maybe there were some hurricanes or a delay in starting school, and maybe you don't have claims for September or October, we're looking for a valid claim in any of those 4 months. So if you have a valid claim in December of 2020, but maybe we're not operating in September, October, November, you would still be eligible for payment because there is at least 1 month of those 4 that you were operating. So CACFP operators are also eligible for payment. The CACFP calculation is exactly the same, but the payment will be done separately. So the issuance of payments will be handled separate from the National School Lunch, School Breakfast, Summer Feeding reimbursement. So schools that operate CACFP may also be entitled to reimbursement. There are 2 types of reimbursements under CACFP. So the first is CACFP meal reimbursements. And this is where our school systems would fall. So if you're a sponsoring organization of centers or after school programs or Head Start centers where you operate CACFP, then there would be a meal reimbursement. Additionally, if you were, which none of our school systems are, but there is a separate CACFP administrative fund, and this is for our sponsoring organizations of daycare home providers. So there are 2 separate CACFP funds for this program, but for our school systems, it would be the CACFP meal reimbursements. The formula is the same for both administrative funds and meal reimbursements. So we're using the exact same calculation, whether we're talking about administrative funds, meal reimbursements, CACFP, NSLP. So the calculation is exactly the same, no matter which program we're talking about or which reimbursement fund in CACFP. So what are the allowable uses of the emergency reimbursement funds? So funds are to be deposited in the nonprofit food service account and can be used in accordance with normal program regulations. So it is for allowable costs within USDA program regulations. So you can use this money to supplement, other incomes you've received to the program from other reimbursement. You've probably seen an increase in food costs. You've seen an increase in paper goods. You paid staff who were working in March through May, and maybe you were not operating. So you can use these funds for anything that is an allowable cost with child nutrition funds. So the payment process, state agencies have to submit an application and an implementation plan to utilize these emergency funds. So we have submitted our application. So our application was due in February, and so we submitted that in February, and the next step is the implementation plan. So the implementation plan has to include a total school food authority count that will be receiving payments, the estimated sum of the payment amount, and also our process to disperse payments. We did submit and receive approval for our initial application, so we submitted that in February. We are working to finish up and submit the implementation plan, so that plan is due in May. And then we will update all of you once the process is finalized and our plan is approved by USDA. So LDOE is responsible for payment calculations. So for schools operating both National School Lunch, School Breakfast, and the Summer Food Service Program in a single month in either 2019 or 2020, the calculation for those applicable months are included. So it's an aggregate sum of all the reimbursements from both programs. And we will calculate the separate monthly reimbursements for schools that are also operating CACFP. The payments are offered to all eligible SFAs. So when we do this calculation and it says that we owe you 5 cents, you are going to receive a payment for 5 cents. So there is no amount that is too small. USDA has indicated that we are to pay any amount that is owed to the SFA. So there may be some small checks going out. SFAs do not have to request payment or opt in to receive payment. So there is no application on your end. You do not have to send us anything. We are taking, the entire universe of who's eligible for payment and working through the calculations ourselves. You don't have to ask for the money. You don't have to fill out anything. We will handle all of that. We do have to make sure that you have a valid agreement. So if if you're operating, you have a valid agreement. If you have a valid agreement and you haven't submitted claims for the months of September through December, we're going to contact you. So there are very, very, very few people that fall into this group. Most of you are operating, have been operating this school year, and so you're automatically eligible for payment if you have this reference month and the reimbursement period. So it would be, we have to have something that we use for the reimbursement period and the reference month. And so it either needs to be the reference periods from 2019, so March, April, May, and June of 2019, or the average of January and February of 2020. And then also the reimbursement periods, which are March, April, May, and June of 2020. So some key dates to remember. The application was due to USDA by February 25th of 2021. We submitted the plan on February the 10th. The next date that's important is the implementation plan, which is due to USDA by May the 10th. USDA recommends that we begin disbursement of funds to SFAs around June 30th, 2021. We just got the question about would it be by June 30th or next school year. being that June 30th is the end of the school year, our intent is to have these funds begin to disperse around July 1. So it would fall into next school year. September 30th, 2021, all funds must be obligated to our program operators. And then all funds have to be dispersed to school systems no later than January 31st, 2022. So some of the guidance that you can refer to if you're looking for information about the emergency cost program, USDA published their initial guidance and first question and answers regarding the child nutrition emergency operational costs in January. And that is memo SFS 21-83, and that is posted on our website. Additionally, USDA released additional implementation plan guidance, which we have posted as memo SFS 21-X116, and also a second set of questions and answers, which is memo SFS 21-X117. And these were released in March. So this is the guidance that we have thus far, but I hope that you found that we were fairly comprehensive in telling you what we know about the emergency cost program, what to expect when you should be starting to see some of these funds coming your way. I'm now going to open it up to questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box, and I will do my best to answer those. Once this training is over, please return to where you registered. So Louisiana Fit Kids, go to today's training, and right above where you would have clicked to register or the agenda, there's a link that says click here to complete the survey. So please go and complete the survey so you can have proof that you attended this training. So please do that as well. But I will open it up to questions, and just feel free to ask a question. I will answer it the best I can. There's a question in the chat box about whether this would be relevant for new CACFP sponsors. So we're looking at the reference month of March, April, May, and June of 2019, or January and February of 2020, and then the reimbursement period of March, April, and May of 2020. So if you were not operating in those periods, so the reference months, the reimbursement period, or the alternate period, or in September through December of 2020, then those particular sponsors would not be eligible for payment for those particular that particular program. And I've already mentioned, we do hope that we will start distributing funds around July 1. This is dependent on the approval of our implementation plan by USDA. So if this gets delayed and not approved as quickly as we hoped, then we will, it may be delayed and would not be until after July 1, but our goal is to have that for July 1. We're still working on the calculations of what would be the exact payment amount, so we don't have that figured out just yet. So we're pretty close, but we're getting that reviewed by appropriation control. If you want to kind of do these calculations yourself to get an idea of what you're being reimbursed, feel free to do so. So the calculation that we're using is straight from what's in these slides, so feel free to use that. So please use that. So the question is whether or not this is by operating site or at a district level. So if you had, 15 sites, but you only operated 5, would we look at that? We are looking at this from a district level. So the sum of the reimbursements for that entire school food authority for the reference period and the reimbursement period. So we are not drilling down to site level and comparing that by site. So it is going to be the aggregate sum of the reimbursement. There's a question about the ESSER funds, which is part of the coronavirus relief package. Those funds are intended to be directed to the school system. If the school system would like to allot funds to child nutrition, that is absolutely okay. But there is nothing that requires them to share those funds with child nutrition. I know some of our school systems are seeing that some of those funds are being passed down, but that is all part of the coronavirus relief package, and those funds are intended for the school system. And if they would like to pass those on, that's absolutely allowable, but it is not required that those funds be shared with child nutrition. And if the questions about the deadline for submission of, if it's about ESSER, I don't know. If it's regarding this application, our implementation plan is due to USDA by May 10th. So our goal is to finalize that plan and have it ready to go before that date. So we'd like to have it ready to go by the end of this week. We're just waiting on the numbers to be finalized and before we can submit that plan. So, and we are going to use the Zoom information from who's registered for this meeting to issue a proof of attendance. Now, this meeting is only half hour, so my goal was to keep this short and sweet, give you the information you need to know, but not hold you up all afternoon. So this is only a 30-minute training. So our goal was to keep this as quick as possible, but feel free to ask any additional questions before we end. Once we have a firm process approved by USDA, we will provide more information about reimbursement and we'll get more idea of how much money will be going to school systems. We're going to wait until that plan gets approved by USDA before we'll start passing that information on. But we do, the turnaround is fairly quick. So, if we get this plan to USDA by May, it will probably be approved, I would say, hopefully in the next month. So after that, so we would be turning around and issuing payments very quickly after getting the final approval, with our goal being July 1. So we do hope that, I feel like July 1's right around the corner. So we're right there to where we're going to start hopefully issuing payments. And I do hope that it is beneficial. So we are, our preliminary numbers are showing a pretty significant increase in payments to a lot of our school systems. So this is really exciting news. I know some of us have struggled most of the year. The evaluation is now posted to the website, so please feel free to go complete that. If you have any other questions, please let us know. Also, don't forget to join us next Thursday for the state update. Our plan is to go over the new waivers. So if you have not read the new waivers, they are really, really, really exciting. So we are going to focus a lot of our time next week going over what exactly those mean. And so please join us then. We'll also touch on the emergency cost as well, and then any other new updates. But next week is really going to be focused on those new waivers. So please, please, please join us. So any other questions, please add those in. If not, then you are free to go, and we hope to see you next Thursday with more information about the new waivers.